In addition to learning how to apply monetary damage rules, we'll also consider a broader question. Why do we choose expectation damages rather than reliance or punitive damages, or the death penalty for breach? As you'll recall, we concluded that protecting reliance is the principal function of contractual enforcement. That makes it something of a puzzle that expectation damages, rather than reliance, are the preferred remedy. Legal scholars have spilled considerable ink trying to explain the law's preference for expectation damages. The textbook excerpt from Judge Posner's book, Economic Analysis of Law, presents what's known as the theory of efficient breach. The basic insight of this theory is that under certain circumstances, it will increase social welfare if a promisor breaches his contract and compensates the promisee for her losses. To understand the theory, we can work through the textbook's modified version of Posner's second example. Seller S signs a contract with buyer B to deliver 10,000 widgets for $1 each, to be used in the buyer's boiler factory. Before S makes any deliveries, a foreign consortium FC offers to pay $2 each for as many widgets as S can produce and deliver within 1 month. S directs all of its production for 30 days to serving FC. Suppose that S can produce 7,000 widgets in that time. We also assume that the delay in delivery will cause B to lose $1,000 in profits because they can't run their boiler production at full capacity. Let's account for the potential gains and losses in this situation. First, S earns an extra $1 for each of the 7,000 widgets for a total of $7,000. But B loses $1,000 in profits from delay. So what does Judge Posner argue that S should do? He says that S should breach the contract and sell to the foreign consortium. S makes an additional $7,000 in profit, from which S must compensate B for its lost profit of $1,000. S's net gain is $6,000, and the original buyer was no worse off than if S had performed. Economists call this a Pareto superior move. That is, someone is made better off and no one is made worse off. Everyone is happy. A Pareto superior move like this improves allocative efficiency and increases social wealth. The widgets go to the buyer who values them most. The seller ends up wealthier. And the original buyer receives compensation in the form of expectation damages for the delay in delivery. But let's ask ourselves if a rule of compensatory or expectation damages is necessary to achieve this desirable result. Suppose in this widget hypothetical that I'm the seller, and I must pay 20 times the contract price, or suffer the death penalty if I breach. What would you expect to happen? Please pause the video now to jot down your answer to this question. You might think that the prospect of punitive damages, or the death penalty, would prevent me from selling to the foreign consortium. But the possibility of bargaining makes that result far less likely. I'll negotiate with the original buyer and try to agree on a price at which he'll let me out of my contractual obligation. The bargaining range will be between the $1,000 in lost profits and the $7,000 potential gain from breach. This analysis is one simple application of what has come to be known as the Coase theorem. If there's a gain to be made from rearranging legal rights, people will find a way to bargain to that new allocation of rights. So let me introduce our discussion of Coase. Recall the hypo of Dan and Lynn. Dan sits on his porch overlooking a scenic river. Lynn owns a factory upstream from Dan's porch. Lynn wants to dump waste in the river that's non-toxic but causes a terrible smell that dissipates only after passing Dan's house. We can imagine that the law might give Lynn the right to dump, or Dan could have the right to prevent dumping. Perhaps tort law calls Lynn's dumping a nuisance. As for their preferences, Dan might value sweet-smelling air, and the right to prevent dumping more or less than Lynn values the ability to dump into the river. Here's a table showing the possible combinations. Think about whether dumping will occur and what, if any, payments will be made in each situation. Take a few moments now to write down your predictions for each of these cases. Here's the completed table. When Lynn values dumping more than Dan values sweet-smelling air, then dumping will occur. If Dan has the right, Lynn will have to pay. And if Lynn has the right, Dan won't be willing to pay enough to stop the dumping. When Dan values sweet-smelling air more than Lynn values dumping, then no dumping will take place. If Dan has the right, he'll refuse Lynn's best offer. And if Lynn has the right, Dan will be willing to pay her enough to stop the dumping. Notice what this analysis suggests. The legal rule doesn't affect whether dumping occurs or not. There's no change in behavior. The only difference is in who pays whom to reach that outcome. We'll call this a strong form of Coasean invariance. Thanks for listening.